To add buttons to this thing, we're going to be adding a lot more than just the text to the list item, right? So we know how to generate buttons. We know how to append things. But we're going to be adding several buttons. And I suspect this thing's just going to get more complicated as time goes on. So I don't want to build all those things from scratch. So I'm going to use a little trick. What I'm going to do is have a list item already sitting here in this list, and then I'm just going to copy it. So let's do it. I'm going to make a list item, and I'm going to give it a class of template to let me know that this one is just a template. This isn't a real list item. It's just taking the place of a real list item. And then instead of just setting its text content to student name, I'm going to put a little span here that we can stick the student name inside. I'm going to have a span with a class of student-name. I'm going to leave it empty. So a span is just a generic container element in HTML. It has no special semantic meaning. Div is the generic block level element. Span is the generic inline level element. Block elements are things like paragraphs, H1s, LIs for that matter. You can think of them as things that will automatically go on a line by themselves. If you put something after a block element, it'll go on to the next line. An inline element like span, other examples would be EM, which we used yesterday, strong, other things like that, that can just happen in the middle of a line. Those are inline elements. So span is the generic inline element. Div is the generic block element. So we're just going to have a span with a class of student name. Then we're going to stick our button in here. So I'm going to make another little span that I'm going to put all of the buttons inside. I'm going to give it a class of actions, because these are all the actions I can take on this student. And I'm going to put a button in there. And like last time, we'll give it a class of button. And I'll just say remove. That was the first one, right? To remove a student. Let's save, let's refresh. So now this is already there. That's kind of a bummer. We want to hide it. Now Foundation happens to give us a class called hide that we can stick on something, and lo and behold, it won't be there. But that's kind of what our template class is supposed to imply anyway. So I'd rather write our own CSS rule that hides anything that has a class of template, because we could have templates for other items too besides these list items. So we already have a file, app.css, with nothing in it. Let's put a rule in there. We want this rule to apply to any element that has a class of template. So we put in a selector that does that. Now we don't have to say query selector all. That's just JavaScript's way of doing selectors. This is CSS. That's where these selectors came from in the first place. So we just say .template. That will select all elements that match that selector. So this is what a CSS rule looks like. Some selector, curly braces, some property, colon, some value, semicolon. Semicolons are not optional. Curly braces are not optional. They must be there. It's not a comma, notice. It's a semicolon. So they look a little like JavaScript objects otherwise. So what do we want to do here? We select some CSS property, namely visibility, colon, hidden. Notice that's not a string. I don't put quotes around that. It's just the word hidden. And remember, I did not take hide off of there yet, so let's make sure we take that off to make sure this rule really works. Refresh. It's not there. If we look at elements, it is there. It's just hidden. If you look at this elements panel, you'll notice it actually shows you all the CSS rules that are applied. So we see this rule is applied. .template visibility hidden. It's there. Turn that rule off, and it comes back. Groovy. So now, when I build the list item, instead of starting from scratch, I want to copy that one. So let's grab the template off the page. Const template equals document dot query selector. We could just do .template. But what if I do add other templates here? That may happen at some point in the future, so I feel like I need to add another class. So let's call it student template. So that's two separate classes, student and template. So our query selector will be .student.template. Remember, no space. Space means something in a selector. So now our LI, instead of being the result of a document.createElement, we're going to take the template and call clone node. Let's look that up. Let's search MDN for clone node. Clone node. There we go, node clone node. Returns a duplicate of the node on which this method was called. Looks like it takes an argument called deep. It says it's optional. True if the children of the node should also be cloned, or false to clone only the specified node. Well, we do want all the children. That's the whole point. We want to get the button and stuff, right? So let's say true. Refresh the page. Let's try actually doing it. Ooh. Hey, what happened? Let's look at our elements. Oh, it's there all right. There's that one. Then this one, because we're adding to the front of the list. Notice it says Ivan in there. So it did add it. It's still invisible. And where the heck's my button? We did a deep copy. What gives? What do you think? Why did it all go away? The class still has template in it. That's why it's invisible. So we need to take that off. How can we do that? All right. We have this selected here, so we can get to it with $0. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Const li equals $0. Li dot, let's try class. Okay, we have class list and class name. Class list looks like an array with student and template. Li dot class name is a string that matches the attribute. So we need to mess with those. So how can we do that? It might seem more sensible to look through the class list array and remove it from the array. I'm not going to do it that way this time because I didn't in the morning. So let's mess with the class name. We can call class name. there's a string function, this is just a string, called replace. How does that work? Let's see what our IntelliSense tells us. li.classname dot replace. Okay. The first argument is search value, a string to search for. Okay, so we want to search for template. Second argument is what we want to replace it with. We want to replace it with an empty string. Notice that that first argument, search value, could be either a string or a regular expression. I don't know what a regular expression is. It sounds complicated. So we're not going to talk about it. But, I'm intrigued. So does this really work? Let's try this. Class name right now is student template. Let's try replace template with an empty string. Yay, student. It's gone. That space is there. Kind of doesn't matter, but if we wanted it gone, we could say trim to strip off white space from the beginning and end. There we go. So now if I do li.classname, hey, it's the same. I've been betrayed again. You can't trust anybody these days, least of all JavaScript. What's the deal? Well, calling replace returns a new string with the replacement made. It leaves the original string alone. So we're going to have to say li.classname equals li.classname replace. So this will return a new string and assign it to li.classname. And that ought to do it. Refresh. What's your name, sir? I'm sorry. Yes. That's right. You're Sam. And you are Clayton. I knew you were a duplicate, but I couldn't remember who. Okay. Clayton. Sam. Okay, it's doing it. Let's look at these. Where's my button? What is this garbage? Where's my button? Who can tell me which of these lines is just blowing that button away? It's on the screen. Yeah. Setting the text content replaces the entire contents of that element with what you put there. Now we said we were going to actually put the name inside this span here, right? Or this span, the student name span. So we don't need to replace the text content of the entire thing, just this student name. So let's tweak that. We know it's the class student name, so I guess we could say document.querySelector.student name. But there's going to be a lot of those, right? How do we make sure it's the right one? Well, guess what? You can call querySelector on another element instead of on document itself to just search inside that element. So if we search inside the li for the selector student name, there should only be one of those. And then we can set the text content of that span to the student name, and it should leave our button alone. Refresh. Try again. Billy. That's right. Think Donkey Kong champion. All right. Billy. Yeah, there's a button. It worked. If we add another one, would it still work? I believe. Pari, do you believe? She believes. It worked. Okay. They've each got their button. Progress. Now, I kind of like the idea of having my own remove class name method, so I'm going to add one. Remove class name. It's going to have to know what element it's removing it from. I'm just going to call that L. And what class name it's supposed to remove. And it's just going to do el.className equals el.className replace. Whatever class name we passed in as the argument, this one, and replace it with nothing. And we'll go ahead and trim off the extra white space. So now we'll say this dot remove class name. The li class name we're removing is template. And with any luck, this should work the same. Who's hiding behind that monitor? That's right. Boy, Alex. I've used you recently. Neat. Does it still work? It does still work. We didn't break it. It still takes the class off because it's not hidden anymore. Excellent. So what do? We now clone a template node when building the list item. It seems a lot easier to just write that HTML than it does to create a bunch of elements from scratch. I like this pattern.